glorification of history. Countries paint a national narrative that political parties likely use to their benefit to ensure that their country's past remains something that their people respect, that people look up to, and in a sense romanticize and even go as far as to worship. Right? As OG, we think that his heritages and histories are important, but glorification leads to a likely stagnation of society in which people look more to the past and refuse to move to their future, to let go of the things that perhaps have wronged them in the past and move on in life, and basically cause a world in which we are living in the past instead of moving and looking to the future. Right. I have two main substantives in this house, in my speech. Firstly, on how this then prevents positive change in society, in which countries hold on to previous grudges that have happened against them, that refuse to let go and move on, perhaps from wars or previous misunderstandings. And one the second substantive on how a prominence of one narrative that favors a particular side of the story ignores other narratives and other people who have perhaps suffered through this life, who are still very much part of this country and society. One of my first substantive on how it prevents positive change. Heritage comes from the past, right? We look towards conservative cultural practices that might clash with more liberal ideas of today, and that are being pushed in this contemporary society, that are being pushed for the benefit of the people, and that to help kind of move us forward into a more contemporary society. Right, this was that populations embedding themselves in old grudges and setting such shames aside are likely going to be much more better for a country's trade, their country's relationships, especially when better and warmer diplomatic ties are preferred into this society where we are still facing much division. For example, just take it like China's hostility towards Japan because of the 19th rape in World War II, where 1960 is a huge part of China's relationships, and the Chinese people have refused to really let go and move on, especially where Japan has as well perhaps not been the most apologetic about what they have done in the past. However, we have to acknowledge that while war crimes were committed, it is 2024, right? It seems that the Chinese efforts to condemn these crimes have been futile. I think it's best that we ignore, we move past these narratives and we move towards a future in which both countries can actually move to cooperate and to build closer ties together that would help the Asia region instead of just basically holding on to their old grudges and refusing to move forward into the future. We think that if both countries are willing to let go and to perhaps strike a partnership, otherwise that these two powers are able to do far more than to just perhaps sit in their past and mull about it, right? Secondly, about how second substantive on how this leads to an ignorance of other narratives. History and heritage have multiple narratives to them. They come from multiple sides of the stories and different people who have experienced different things in the past. For society to move forward, then we need to understand two things. Firstly, that everyone needs to understand the full story behind the narrative that is carried to them, and secondly, to never repeat history, because even if you idolize a particular political figure, that is impossible that they have not done a major wrong. Those are a group of people that perhaps is just not you, right? Heritage links from things to people, and in many cases that political members that are revered in certain countries have done huge wrongs to other countries that we should try and never repeat in the future. A glorification of characters and narratives in history are everywhere, and when people respect or even idolize past leaders, such actions and such people and their ideology that has led to such basically brutal wrongs in the past is romanticized in these countries. For example, Mao Zedong in China, where people go as far as to think of him as a actual leader in which they should model their current countries political future upon, right? This is something that a government uses in China as a tool that people actively tries to look up to him, and it's currently kind of bad because of how many crimes that he has committed in his process of being China's political leader, even though he has done many good to furthering China as a country in today's modern society. Ignoring the effect of ignoring the other side of the story leads to the fact that on the path to greatness, these people ignore what has been sacrificed and how many lives have been lost in the case. Mao Zedong has killed 48 to 78 million people in his journey of trying to create the China that we know today, right? Lee Kuan Yew has, even as he's a great leader, has imprisoned political opponents without trials. These are things we try and avoid in society today so that we can finally move forward, let go of the past, and try and build a society in which we can be more cohesive and we can actually move forward together instead of being individual countries and individual political leaders that are divided on multiple things that has long been done in the past. without an understanding of the full story, which is likely to happen given that political parties in these countries, or perhaps these countries are the ones benefiting from this, and ignoring the fact that another country or another group of people in this country have suffered from the same narrative and the same person that that they're basically kind of glorifying in this in their heritage and in their history, because there's two main impacts that come by this. Firstly, we're going to cause a likely repeat of history because people see these leaders as their role models, and they're likely going to be acting as they have done because they see these people as great individuals that have done only good for their country, and ignoring those acts of killing the other people in their country, right? It's easy for them to then mirror these individuals in real life in today's society, where they're just going to be, but just because they're unaware of the truth and not because they actively try and hide and not understand the truth, right? We think that a glorification of these narratives causes these people to be unknowingly unaware instead of truly aiming to become a new Mao Zedong, for example. Secondly, we think that this causes a likely division in society. Think of the families that have died because of Mao Zedong's 48 to 78 million casualties in his rule. These are people still living in China. These are families that still have a life there. And whenever they think of their fellow members, basically glorifying Mao Zedong, they think of what they have done, what he has done to their families. This causes a division in society in which they can no longer accept the fact that so many people in their country are basically acting as if Mao Zedong is a great person, and ignoring all the crimes that he has personally done to these people, ignoring the crimes that he has committed in the time of his rule. And we think that in a society in which there's a huge group of people that glorifies these leaders and another group of people that has suffered tremendously because of these leaders, that their country can never move forward as a whole fact, because there's going to be multiple divisions and multiple parties supporting different people and different lives, in which we're all stuck in the past and unable to move forward to a better future together. And for the side that actually manages to move society forward, please cite the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
One of my fondest memories while growing up was going to a museum with my grandfather, where I learned not only about my own country's heritage, India, but also the country I'm living in, heritage, Singapore, and how their diplomatic ties have improved the state of both Singapore and India, and how countries also tend to help each other. We feel that opening Gov's entire case is on the fact that heritage means that heritage is the behavior of people, but it's clearly said in the Infoslide, heritage is about qualities such as historical buildings, traditions, cultures. It's not about the behavior of people. And a few responses, right? First, we say that the behavior of people can change. People might have had a bit of racist a mindset for some countries back then, but in the way how community has been moving forward, and how communities have been progressing as a country to be a better country, we see that because of our heritage, we can learn from the mistakes that we made, right? No, we also want you to notice, right, that because they say that we also want you to take note, right, that yes, there are some bad things, some bad aspects of heritage, such as buildings that remind people of the Holocaust, or buildings that remind people of the USSR, right? But we also want you to take note exactly that the community is moving away from this. We can see that the Berlin Wall was destroyed. It was vandalized to show that Germany has moved past this. Germany is currently paying reparations for the Holocaust that happened in World War II, and we want to show you that heritage is the reason why countries are able to move forward and not stay in the past like OG is accusing it to be, right? Now, we also And they also do not, the entire case is how historical grudges hold people back, and they are stuck on this example of China, right? How like China and Japan have like really bad historical ties, and Japan's not very forgiving, right? Well, we also have examples. Japan and Singapore. During World War II, when Japan invaded Singapore, it was a hellhole. People were dying everywhere. We all know the Ching happened. However, now in today's world, Singapore and Japan do have good diplomatic ties. They just want to tank on one country, China, who's not a very charitable actor in this debate. Actually, yes.
What do you think there's a difference between learning and appreciating heritage versus glorifying it?
Okay, we want you to know, right, when you glorify something, okay, I think, let's establish a metric for glorification, right? Glorification in this debate should be appreciation, learning from our mistakes, and also seeing how, and moving forward, right? So, this takes out OG on how they think that we are stuck in the past. Now I will explain the importance of heritage, and there's 4 things. Yes, 4 things. First, it helps people stay connected with the roots. It's important to keep tradition alive because tradition is what used to be like the main thing back whenever like history was very prominent. Like for example in India, like 1500 years ago, when there were like kingdoms, tradition is what kept people alive. Tradition is what help people stay connected with their roots, and it's important. Now, the reason why it's important that we stay connected with our roots is because it helps us realize both our mistakes and also what we should continue to be a successful actor in the world. We also want you to take note, right? Like I've said before, yes, people have made mistakes in the past, but they have been paying for this. I've given you the example of Germany. If you want another example, America has been very accused of being racist back like in the mid 1900s, right? But America has moved forward with BLM. We've also seen like the LGBTQ movement progressing so much in the last decade. This is all because of heritage. Heritage teaches people why we should not be stuck in the past and why we should move forward from the mistakes we've made. However, we also want you to take note, right? Heritage makes people feel more appreciative of the present. Timothy will expand more on this, right? But we also want you to take note that nowadays, people take everything for granted. People think that their living conditions aren't that great. Oh, I live in a HDB. I'm not the guy who lives in a condo. We want you to take note, right? When people learn about their heritage, when people learn about how like their ancestors used to live 100 200 years ago, they'll realize that they're so lucky. Back then life was not that good. Life was really bad because of how the world was like thinking, right? Because of like people being very power hungry. But now the world where people have progressed more and will progress more because of history, it makes people realize that their present is so much better and they should be working towards a future where there's global peace. We also want you to take note, right? Heritage celebrates and memorializes people. People who have fought for a country. People who have helped a country bring up from ruins. This looks like, for example, Gandhi in America or Martin Luther King in US, right? These people laid down their life to bring nations to higher places. They spend all their life working hard, risking their life because they don't want their future generations to live in the same like disgusting living conditions that they are currently living in, right? We also, this is why if our present generations look back at heritage, because we don't look at heritage enough. If our present generations look back at the heritage, they'll also be able to make a better future for the future generations. And this is what we want, a world that is progressing. And the best way we get a world to progress is heritage. We also want you to take note, right, that heritage does this best by stories. Heritage does all of the benefits we have best because of stories passed down to generations telling stories of these war heroes. We have days, events celebrated for these war heroes, like Republic Day in India or MLK Day in US. All these stories, all these memorials built right after their death, like built like 100, 200 years ago. All of this heritage, one, teaches, solves OG's like accusation that we are stuck in the past and proves to you why we who sort of glorify heritage, move forward into life. We learn, appreciate, and use heritage in a way where we can move forward and not stay stuck. All of this is why we beat OG in the first place, and OO probably running the same similar cases where heritage might bring back like horrible memories. But if heritage were really to bring horrible memories, that's why we have reparations, like I've told you before. With all of that, OO.
Thanks for the speech, DPM.
Oh shit.
Isn't it here? Oh, sorry. My bad. At the point at which we on OG point out, we are here for the learning of heritage. We support people learning about their historical and cultural roots, but not the outright glorification of it, which oftentimes can happen without justification, without proper justification, where governments strive to point out only the good parts about their heritage, about history, without pointing out systematic flaws. We think we take down OO's case. Two main rebuttals: one, defending what my PM has stated, and two, attacking what they have presented in their material. So first, I'd like to clarify that glorification doesn't have to, that glorification on most occasions involves about like unjustifying things that are like unjustified. Glorification oftentimes happens when governments always push for good narratives that always come that are aligned with their own stance in a political and societal context. For example, when it comes to like the Chinese stance on like a lot of global narratives about communism, about things such as like the Japan history. And I'd like to point out, no thank you, that when they say that glorification doesn't have to mean being stagnant, and instead it's about appreciating the present, we have two layers of response. First, this is false. A lot of young people today who have not experienced the struggles of the past are really taking things for granted. This is an increasing trend we see from people who are increasingly embedded in social media, who are increasingly spending money in like posh things such as like Zara, for example, like Gucci, on all of these luxuries that people didn't have in the past. Why is this so? It's not just because people don't feel like connected to their roots. It's just because of modern trends where people think our struggles right now are not the same as the struggles that happened in maybe like the 15th century, maybe like the 10th century, or maybe even the 20th century, because of how our societies have modernized and how living standards have improved in most places of the world. But secondly, we're okay with appreciating the present by protecting current pieces of heritage. We're okay with telling people, yes, you should definitely go to visit like cultural sites such as museums. You should definitely visit botanic gardens, for example, because it's a UNESCO heritage site. Just that we're not okay with the glorification of it when we block out the negative parts and when people are blinded by such glorification. So on our side, we are still able to achieve people appreciating the present because we still allow such museums and galleries to be exposed to the public in the first place. But secondly, when they point out that heritage is not the behavior of the people as response to my PM, I disagree. Why? Glorification is a social narrative. It is when governments tell citizens to support our history, when we are ordered to admire certain objects and certain values that have passed down from generation to generation, and traditions associated with things sensitive, like politics and race, that people buy into such narratives, and these narratives influence their behavior, because that's exactly what narratives are about, yes.
You say that the current governments use the heritage to align with their policies, but if heritage was there like 200, 300 years ago, how will that align with their current political stances?
You see, governments can pick and choose. I will explain this later on, but a lot of the existing political ideologies right now have come from, they have originated from the past. Governments can pick and choose which societal groups they want to support, which societal groups they want to suppress through such glorification because they're in charge of it. I'll explain later on. Furthermore, heritage is just like the qualities of people, as much as it is the history of a country and maybe like historical buildings, for example. We think the Tiananmen Square is a really stark example and reminder of a country's past because of things such as like the Cultural Revolution that happened in China, and that has really had a great impact on the nationalistic narrative that China has, which might suppress other views that oppose such narratives. Now moving on to a further extension of my Prime Minister's case. She talked about the division of people because of glorification. Heritage is sensitive. It represents historical narratives, both shared and divided experiences of different groups of people. But it also represents a tool to cause division because of how in many countries, heritage is a combination of different narratives from majority and minority groups, from people of different races and religious communities, and maybe political ideologies that potentially clash. So one key question we need to ask is who is responsible for this glorification? As I've alluded to earlier on, we think it's most likely the government. Two structural reasons. First, the government has the highest capability to maintain and promote heritage sites and objects. For example, states fund national museums because they have such financial power and they can obviously obtain economic revenue from such heritage sites when tourists visit, when locals visit, etc. And secondly, governments have the power to incorporate glorification into national policies. This is how they strengthen the strategy of glorification. For example, when the government promotes cultural festivals in China, Japan, South Korea, etc., when the Singapore government promotes the teaching of the political history of Singapore in our own history curriculum, these are examples of how governments are able to incorporate the systematic glorification into our own education, into our daily lives, and how they continue this glorification down for generations and generations. However, moving aside from this, now that I've proved that governments are most likely behind such glorification, we need to point out that governments also have the power to determine which culture or group's heritage should be protected and be glorified, since they are responsible for allocating and diverting funds to the glorification of our history, to protecting and maintaining cultural and heritage sites around this nation. For example, our museums and galleries and all the objects in them. One key example that we have that's very relevant in the Singaporean context is Oxley Road. We all know the conflicts among the Lee family about this heritage site. We know that the residence at Oxley Road was the former residence of our Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. We also know that Lee Kuan Yew did wish to demolish his estate. However, because of some disputes right now, Lee Hsien-loong, our former PM, has also stated that he has convinced his father not to demolish this. However, as we can see, such disputes have already been carried into the political spectrum of Singapore. When we say that in 2017, Lee Hsien-loong had to bring this squabble into the parliament because he had to address public concerns about how heritage sites are managed, about how such heritage sites have a big role in the political spectrum of Singapore. When citizens become concerned about such glorification of heritage sites because of maybe Lee Kuan Yew's residence was such a big, important part of the origins of the PAP, for example, we think these are occasions when we want citizens to be united instead of divided because of such heritage glorification. Because we stand for a united front against the oppression of, for example, policies and ideologies that contrast the current incumbent government, we stand for the protection of things such as cultural reform when we want to keep up with the modern society and modernization of the globe. Very proud to stand on OG. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Before I start, quick shout out to a few people. One is SMU for providing me a 50% subsidy. Second would obviously be Kevin. I mean, even though he didn't really watch any of my rounds, but he's still here today. And lastly, thanks to my teammate who I don't know, like. And also thanks for letting us break with 5 points. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll start now. Unlike government, I don't really have the spec to give you concrete examples to prove why some things are the way they are, but I do have intuition, right? There's a few arguments I'm going to dislodge today, 3 main ones. Firstly is on this idea about how it prevents positive change. Secondly, on how governments are glorifying these people into education. And thirdly, on the point on division amongst people. The first thing about positive change, right? A government tries to tell you that how country will hold grudges, this will prevent further agreements with one another, and then how this will have political instability amongst the countries and stuff like that, right? I think the main problem here is that they haven't proven their lowest burden in this debate, which is how their side makes it better, right? They just say that, oh, well, once there's no more grudges, then people will form agreements. But this is systemically wrong for 2 main reasons. Firstly is the fact that grudges will still exist, right? Grudges is not tied to a person, it's tied to actions. People, yeah, thanks Kevin. Yeah, so grudges are tied to actions, right? Which means that the actions still prevail. Which means that even if you don't glorify, let's say Mao Zedong, then the fact that he still killed millions of people will still exist in the status quo. I don't see how they fix the action part of this debate whatsoever. But secondly, it's kind of unclear as to why they would strike an agreement with people. I mean, firstly is the fact that the country's interests need to align, right? This looks like imports and exports. Secondly is the fact that their political views have to align. Obviously, Singapore is not going to partner with North Korea because they're systemically different in their political views, right? So which means that even if they're, no longer holding grudges, there's still multiple barriers that they have to break down in order for you to buy the fact that they will actually form agreements, right? Now, the next thing I want to dislodge is government's point about how they say the government is at fault because they incorporate glorification into education, right? Firstly, I just want to question why are they painting the governments as villains? Like, I mean, Damien's whole case is talking about why education and history is good. Damien's whole case is about talking about why this is helpful to people, right? But secondly is the fact that, like, the government is not going to give radical views and say, oh, Mao Zedong is the best, Mao Zedong is great, right? Because obviously, if it's so, then people will be like, oh, what the hell, wait, so you support killing millions of people? There's a flaw in logic in our government's case. But the second point is that they have to make it objective. The government has an incentive to make it objective because they don't want to brainwash their kids. If they make it so that the education is telling their kids, oh man, you should go and kill people, if they make it so that the education is telling the people that, oh, maybe killing is okay, then obviously this is gonna, like, break down the social construct and stuff like that, obviously it's not going to be good for the people. But thirdly, I think this is the most important point in this debate, which is the point where they talk about the people, right? And I think this has been largely unaddressed by government. Their point about division amongst people is frankly uncharitable because they say how there will be a repeat of history because people look up to these people and how this will cause a division of families, right? There's 3 main ways I'm going to dislodge this argument. Firstly is the fact that the glorification part of their case is already wrong. You don't glorify the killing, right? And this is what's the main problem. People obviously in things like Germany, you don't glorify Hitler for killing millions of Jews. In things like North Korea, you don't glorify the leader for killing millions of oppressed people, right? You glorify them for other things. You glorify them for being hardworking. You glorify them for being smart, right? And the more realistic idea of glorification is glorifying the good traits of the leaders. You don't glorify the part where the leader is fat and ugly. You glorify the part where the leader is like crawling out of poverty, right? And that's the essential part of this debate, which means that the mechanism here is simple. If people do actually follow these glorifications, it will only end up good because the glorification part is only the good things, right? And if you don't believe that the glorification is good, if you don't believe the fact that people actually glorify only the good parts, you will believe that the premise in government's case is already wrong. They say that people will follow this. Why is it so? They don't explain this to you. Firstly, is the fact that people are not dumb. If people see that, oh, why are we glorifying someone who's killing people, right? They're obviously not going to follow it because they don't like committing mass murder. But secondly, is the fact that public scrutiny is at an all-time high. You see governments propagating these things. Obviously, the people are going to be like, oh, what the hell? Why are you trying to brainwash our kids, right? Which means that the government is incentivized to not do this because they are beholden to the voters, because they want to get the voters to vote for them and stuff like that, right? Realize that at this point in in this point in the debate, we have proven to you why most people wouldn't actually follow glorification. Now I'll explain to you why government's case only applies to the most radical people who will follow it blindly, right? Realize that the first tier of mitigation is that this is largely symmetrical. If people are radical, they're going to follow anyone they can find. If there's someone committing mass murder in the status quo, they will follow that person as well. It doesn't just mean that it's Mao Zedong that they have to follow, right? But the second thing is that, it's symmetrical. Before I move on to my substantive on how I help the vulnerable people and explaining to you why we need heritage in the first place, closing.
You're opposing the motion itself. You're contradicting your own side. You're saying people won't glorify this, but the motion says that people will.
Okay, first of all, listen to my speech. Second of all, I told you how people will glorify the good parts of a person, right? Nobody is going to come up here and say Kim Jong-un was a super fit, Kim Jong-un was me. Nobody's gonna say that, right? Nobody's gonna call Kim Jong-un out for being fat and obese. They're gonna call Kim Jong-un out for the good things. They're gonna say he was a smart leader. They're gonna say he was a strong headband leader that helped the country come out of poverty, right? Which means that No. That means that the likelihood that these people will actually glorify the good things is far more because they want to have people that align with the political beliefs of the state. Now, how do we actually help vulnerable people, right? Because realize that these people in this debate are the most vulnerable. These people don't really have family or friends and they're isolated, right? These people are the people we ought to care about the most. And they find hope in things like, and a big part of the debate that we are forgetting, which is the objects of heritage, right? When they look around them in the room and then they're like, oh man, that's a vase my grandma left me. They're obviously going to think, maybe my grandma is here with me, right? And the key point here is that objects are oftentimes the only tangible thing people can relate to when they have no one else. Is the only thing they can feel and materialize in the real world, which means that this is oftentimes a tipping point where they realize that maybe my life isn't so bad, maybe I have hope, maybe I can get out of the precarious situation that I'm currently in, which means that our side is the only one that helps the most vulnerable people because we give rise to things like heritage and objects like that. But secondly, right, we will now explain to you why we need heritage, because realize that humans are often creatures of rumination. They care about things like thinking about the past, they care about things like wanting to look in the past and talking about their past actions, right? Which means that they don't oftentimes care about the future at all. When you're meeting out with a group of friends, you talk about what happened last week or talk about what happened like just now, right? You don't talk about what's happening in the moment, which means that it necessitates the constant reminders that Damien talks about. But furthermore, realize that the comparative in this debate is simple. Because they don't have these reminders, proposition doesn't prove their own burden on how the alternatives work or why the alternatives are better to supporting our case, which means that people oftentimes in government's world takes things for granted, people feel underappreciated, and thus what's this? Work is for naught because people feel underappreciated. Yeah, thank you.
Next, let's start the closing half. Remember, yeah.
Can I go to it?
I am.
Okay lah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
It's my bottle for me.
I think we can start without him. You can do it. Okay.
Have you ever heard of the person named Johnny Somali? If you don't know who he is, basically, he was someone who currently resides in South Korea. And he has currently become very, very infamous for playing P. Diddy songs and rubbing baby oil all over himself and a statue of a Korean essay survivor. Now, the reason why he even did this in the first place is not just because the statue even exists in the first place, but mostly because of the glorification of this statue and how it seems more holier than thou, for lack of a better term, honestly. Now, firstly, I'd like to mention the difference between appreciation and glorification. Now, the definition for glorification is something that is made to appear more important than that of the case. However, appreciation is appreciating something for what it is and finding the importance of what it is at its very core. Now, when you realize the difference between glorification and appreciation, you start to realize how this motion starts to teeter towards the government side. Now, yes, sir.
Although people may have different views on the heritage that they have, doesn't this mean that heritage can educate people on the true story?
As I'm going to talk about later, even if it does educate people, with the glorification of it, it also enables bad actors to start doing things that make the sites lose their reputation. Now, firstly, I'd like to state a few rebuttals. Now, when we're talking about things such as like learning about the past, as I will talk about later, there's people such as like neo-Nazis or misogynists who can desecrate these places, these statues, these traditions, or even use these traditions for their cases, such as, you know, shaking hands with a statue of Hitler, let's say, or using traditions to justify their misogynistic viewpoints or transphobic viewpoints. So when you're glorifying these and making them more popular for people, especially those who are not part of that culture, you're enabling bad actors to start using it. And when you glorify it, there's not many people who can tell you, hey, you shouldn't use it for that reason, because, you know, most of these people who are saying that's wrong may not even be part of that tradition, so they don't feel the need to speak on a culture, because, you know, it's not their say. So we're really just, if you're agreeing with opposition, no thank you. When you're agreeing with opposition, you're also agreeing to the fact that you're going to enable more bad actors to exist. Now, secondly, actually, I'd like to move on to my substantive now. I have a few substantives about one, progression and how it's being halted, and two, disrespect that comes about. Now, firstly, I'd like to state that yes, these heritage sites can help us to learn from our past and to learn about what our cultures have gone through, the hardships, everything like that. However, when you're glorifying something and idolizing it, it makes it seem like the past is more preferable, and it doesn't have to relate to, you know, the worst case where it's like statues of bad actors. It can just be simple things such as, oh, I really wish I was in the America back in the 1980s. Nuclear families seem so peaceful. When you start to idolize the past like this, it seems almost preferable to our present day. And even though most people who aren't really, for lack of a better term, indoctrinated by these, by such heritage, it doesn't allow for space for newer things to shine, such as brutalist statues. Many people say, oh, the old was so much better because we don't have minimalism. And they start to disregard the meaning of minimalism and brutalism or modern art in favor for, you know, the past. When you don't allow for newer things to shine, it also leads to conservative ideals being more widespread. And it also allows for modern ideals to be buried. No, thank you, sir. And now onto my second point about disrespect. Now, we will say this right here, right now. We agree that this problem is not exclusive to their side. It's even a problem in status quo with the example I stated earlier. However, we believe that it's a symbiotic relationship. When something is more idolized, something is more seen as glorious and perfect, the more people will try to desecrate it. The respect for it for people that don't understand it will go down. It can be seen in everyday examples such as K-pop stans or, you know, people who celebrate certain festivities. But this can also be applied in our case, which is if you idolize a tradition, if you idolize a building, if you idolize anything really, you're going to allow for bad actors to come in and start desecrating these areas and these traditions. Now, when most of the younger generation or foreigners don't really understand anything, because, you know, it seems bigger, it seems like people are really appreciating it just because it's a heritage site and not the history behind it. No, thank you, sir. People are more inclined to disrespect these cultures because, you know, everyone's always looking for clout. And because of this, people are more likely to use these stuff as a way to boost some ideals or ruin reputations. And there's so many bad actors nowadays, whether it be people who are ignorant, people who just don't want to learn, people who spend their time on 4chan maybe. These people are maybe not important, but when you glorify something and someone ruins it, it's going to cause a very big reaction. And it's still going to ruin the reputation of something much more. When people, sometimes, monkey see, monkey do. When someone will desecrate some sort of tradition, people will follow in suit when they see how much clout this person has. So because of the fact that it stunts progression and the relationship between the disrespect and the idolization. And not only have I shown that glorification does not equate to appreciation, and thus you should side with the closing opposition, government, whatever.
Thank you. Member of.
Thanks.
So first, OG, right? They have two main points today in this debate. One is that people will refuse to move on into the future if we have this glorification, and the second one is it could be exploited by the government. And I'm going to respond to both, right? Firstly, they tell us that people will refuse to evolve, people will refuse to develop into the future if they care so much about the past, right? However, we think that's simply unrealistic, because just because people celebrate and they hold the past in a high regard does not mean they don't want development, right? Because what's the main incentive of development, right? Because companies want profit. Companies develop things because they want profit, and that's not going to change in our world. So we believe that the incentive to develop, the incentive to invent new things, that's still going to be there. And so we entirely don't get that case from the government side, right? And they also tell us that with this glorification, it can paint one side as good and one side as bad, right? However, we believe that just because people hold culture in high regard does not mean they can't be critical with historical events, right? Because, for example, they give us the example of China, right? They tell us that, people in China glorify the culture, and so like nobody can tell that the historical figures did bad things, right? But firstly, our first response is that that's simply not true, right? If you look at those, if you look at people's knowledge of history, they still condemn the wars that happened. They still condemn the bad emperors that were in history before, but they still celebrate and they still glorify the artifacts and the traditions and the stories that were passed down. We don't think those two things affect each other. And secondly, we think that their example of China is not good in this debate in the first place, right? Because China is a communist country. So with or without glorification, the government's going to be spreading propaganda. So we don't get how the glorification of heritage would make this worse, or how it's even the more effective way to do this, which I will explain. But do you want to make it?
Okay. Would you support the glorification of the continuing African tradition of genital cutting despite calls of opposition from feminists looking for progressive change?
We think that with the more progressive views, people know what is right and people know what is wrong, right? You said yourself that right now, the modern world, we have progressive views that are different. So we think that we will glorify, we think that people know what to glorify, and people in Africa, people in Africa and people outside, they still glorify the cultures in African culture, for example, the clothing and the stories, but that doesn't mean they approve of this, process, right? We think they can mutually exist with each other. And next, they tell us that this is going to romanticize the heritage and keep people's attention away from all these issues in history, and people are going to repeat. However, we believe that this isn't even the most effective way for the government to use propaganda, right? We believe that the glorification of culture and heritage does not equal to propaganda, because culture and tradition is such a it's something that passed down from generations and generations between families and communities, right? It's something that's integrated in people's personal lives, in people's daily lives. Like, for example, the different celebrations that they attend, the clothes that they wear to traditional festivals, the stories that their mother told them, that their grandma told their mother, right? So we don't think think that this narrative is controlled by the government because of this long line of origins that even the government cannot influence because it's so deeply rooted in these people, right? In these people's culture, right? So we believe that in both worlds, yes, the government still has propaganda. And while OG tells us that OO tells us that the government isn't as bad. We think that we can tell you that even if the government is spreading propaganda like they say, we think there's much more effective ways such as the news, such as the textbooks, such as posters around the world. And we think that these things are much more effective than using this cultural artifacts and cultural traditions. And we think that, so we don't think we see the harms in Sure.
I think that culture and tradition are deeply embedded in our society and people actually subscribe to such things. This is why propaganda from governments that utilize the exploitation of such culture is very effective.
But we're telling you that it's not that easy for governments to influence these narratives because of this long line of origins and because of how deeply set it is in everyone's daily lives, right? So we think that with things like news, with things like posters, these people, these citizens, they don't know anything about the statistics behind it. They don't know the motives, and that's much more easier. So why would the government choose this harder way that could cause a lot of backlash from the angers of the citizens, right? And so this is why we think that OG is out of today's debate. So CG, right? We think that there's not really any new extensions in their debate except that idolization equals foreign people who don't know about these cultures disrespecting this culture. However, what's the incentive for these foreign people to disrespect the culture, right? Why would a tourist just randomly come into a country and then spit on our art just because they see that people like it, right? You don't explain the mechanism or the incentive behind any of this, right? We think what's most likely is that these tourists, these foreign people, they come in, they see the celebration and the bond between the community, and they appreciate it with the community, right? They learn to appreciate the diverse. Appreciate the diverse cultures that these communities have, right? And we believe that's the more realistic thing of what's happening in the world, and that people are not as aggressive and not as evil as you claim them to be. So, which is why we believe that CG is also out of the debate, right? So, why do we win over OO? So, what's our unique contribution to today's debate, right? We believe that this our house, we give minority communities pride, right? Because right now, what are the minorities bonded together for? Over their struggles. They're bonded together because they have to live in the same place because of their economic status. They are bonding because of they all can't find the good job opportunities because of the deep-set discrimination in our society, right? But we believe that culture is a unique factor that brings people together because of love and because of joy instead of suffering, right? We believe that it's stories that all these families have spread from each other, that all these families have passed down, these shared stories behind these artifacts, these shared knowledge about what their ancestors did and what they celebrated. That's what brings them together with a positive light. And we believe that is so important because it proves why glorification is important, right? It's not just appreciation. Because you need such a strong feeling to uplift these vulnerable people from their hopeless state. And you need such a strong feeling to bond these people who don't know each other together so that they can work together to earn more rights. For example, lobbying with the government for rights and advocating for their rights together through protest. So proud to.
Thank you.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'll be starting my speech by summarizing all the points given in this debate so far. OG as the main point so far has been the prevention of positive change and the suffering of the people on the other side of the story. OO's point so far has been moving forward and learning from history, while CG us have been more about progression and how disrespect comes about towards this art. CO has not properly addressed the motion, and most of the speech is about the importance of culture. And this would have been accurate if the motion was this house believes that culture is important, which it is not. I will be going on to some singular rebuttals now. The OOPM has said that they feel that heritage is not just on the behavior of people. But isn't that what culture is? It's the behavior of people. And celebrating tradition is also the behavior of people. So this is completely inaccurate. Next, they have also plainly stated that glorification equals appreciation, when this is completely false, right? Glorification is looking up, thinking of it as something really, really good, while appreciating is learning how to love it. They also have said that history will not remain stagnant by appreciating history. However, he made this point that America has moved away from racism, but whenever I open my Instagram, I see so many racist jokes, which in fact comes from America. So, are you sure America has moved on completely from racism, or is it just Black Lives Matter? OOPM has also said something about memorials, but this just proves OG's point that there's some people who don't like these people who die. So just building these memorials may offend them. I will now go on to rebut OODPM. OODPM said that people won't glorify wrongdoings, yet she's already brought up people glorifying P. Diddy. The government will spread propaganda, and let's say North Korea's president works hard and yes, please.
Don't people know the difference between bad actors and regular people? So can't we trust people to make that like normal separation between bad actors and regular people?
The average intelligence thinker sees and believes what they see on the news or what people tell them. They won't immediately go fact check. Yes, there are few people who will go and fact check these facts, but like most people see and believe, get influenced, and then suddenly they start believing in these things. I will go on to rebut COLO. They said that celebrating tradition does not equal not wanting development, but glorifying equals looking up. That means glorifying already means not looking up. Thus, celebrating tradition may also mean that they don't want development. They also only talk about how culture is important. They have not gone on to say how they oppose how they don't oppose the glorification of heritage. They've only said how culture and tradition is important for the roots of people. Yes, we accept that and we appreciate it, but we do not glorify it. They've also said that even if the government spreads propaganda, the news, textbooks and activity books will explain the real truth. But don't these textbooks and the news go through the government too? Like whatever the government says, that's what's gonna be in your news and your textbooks. And these news can be easily taken down when paid, and these textbooks can be easily removed. So you're not gonna see the real truth in a textbook for very, very long. CO also does not understand the hate. They can't just write off bad actors. There's so many people, social media, the news, they're always searching for clout. And they will... Yes, please.
Why do you think a government's news would on purpose portray their own culture as bad?
What?
Why do you think a country's news would on purpose portray their own culture as bad?
That's so cute.
Could you phrase that a bit differently?
Okay, why do you think people who come to the country would actively hate on culture if they come to that country to appreciate culture?
Okay, I was just saying this in my speech. They're active attention seekers. They want the attention, so they will do... Why does vandalism exist, first of all? If you go and roam around in the city of Rome and go inside Italy, you can see so much vandalism on the walls. Maybe that's a way for them to express themselves. However, it's also a way for seeking attention, getting people's comments, and that's what they want. You will get hate and you will get love. There's a difference. I will go on to explain the main clashes of this debate. Which side has a more logical explanation for moving forward from history? This was brought up by both OO, OG, and our team CG. I can take that OO's point by saying they made the statement that America has moved on from racism and other stuff they've done bad, like slavery. But however, you can't deny the fact that some of it still exists. I still get racist comments. I'm pretty sure at least one of us... No, thank you. At least one of us has received one racist comment, and America hasn't moved on from that. OG also brought up that they will move on from history. However, we beat OG because we delve deeper and elaborate more than them. Next clash is which side better defines glorification. I'm pretty sure in this debate, a lot of people has misunderstood the meaning of glorification. Glorification does not mean appreciation. It means looking up and learning and being influenced by this type of heritage, such as objects and traditions. It does not mean appreciating it, loving it, which is a whole different thing. I will go on to summarize why we win this debate. CG wins over OG because we elaborate more on the glorification, that we elaborate more on the fact that glorification does not equal appreciation. Even though CG has made a few valid points, we still elaborate and delve deeper into this fact. Now, why does CG win against OO? Well, this is easy because there's an incorrect understanding of the motion in OO. They said glorification, not appreciation, but you would win the topic on THO, the appreciation of heritage. So why does CG win against CO? Is because the motion is not THBD, culture is important, and that is why you should side with CG. Thank you.
Who are we without our past, and where would we be now without it? I think we wouldn't be anywhere without our past because we have learned from what we did in the past. So proud to oppose. Few things in this speech, a few rebuttals, and then a crash as to the harms over benefits of heritage, and then lastly on why our extension weighs over OO. Okay, let's start with PM. She talked about how people would hold on to grudges, whether that be to conservative qualities and ideals, or a country as a whole holding a grudge against someone else. We think this is extremely impractical in our status quo, because I don't think any country would hold grudges to sever a trade relation with another one. For example, they gave us the example of China and Japan. We think that China and Japan have very strong economic ties, whether that be because of things like Japanese investment or Chinese investment, it doesn't matter, but we think that they will never ever put something that has happened so much in the past over something that's directly impacting their citizens right now, such as economic benefits and political benefits. And we think that the thing of conservative qualities and ideals doesn't actually really hold because no one's actually going to believe conservative qualities and ideals in today's status quo because of the progressiveness, as we've told you in our first speech.
Phua.
Yes.
In many cases of glorification, the ugly side of heritage is not known to the people because glorification hides the suffering, as O themselves said. How do you expect people to know what is right or wrong, or what is propaganda or not?
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer this a little later, but I'll tell you right now. We think that even if governments or people choose to glorify the best parts of the case, why do you think that there's people are still going to be aware of the other side of the case anyway? Few things here. We think that this links onto the point as to even if we glorify the best parts of politicians, why do we still know the bad side? We think that instead, people are going to be the ones talking about it, discourse, sharing it through social media, and we think that this is going to highlight other narratives and struggles. Because when we see people see their country, see their own people go through something, we think that this inherently empowers them. We think that they feel some sort of relatability or some sort of thing that they can get through this, and we think that this leads to things like minority narratives and narratives about struggles to come to light because it becomes so popular, because people are actively looking for those kind of things to support themselves and to say that nationalism can help me get through this. And we think that we can actually flip their benefit onto our side by saying that we inherently then bring about positive change for people because they're able to now look through, get light through someone else's struggles, whether that be learning from their mistakes or like learning that they can get through it in the end as well.
Okay, we think that the Prime Minister then talked about how people don't get the full narrative, and how we think that this will help them repeat history and idolize past politicians. We think that this is precisely our point. If you don't idolize or glorify history, you're never going to know what actually happened. You're never going to know what actually happened, because in textbooks you read in school, all you're going to hear is the best parts of the country, and we think that we think that even if you glorify it, we think that you're never going to get the full side. This is, for example, of people whose family who died but you've never known about it. We think that in this case, we have answered to you why people would actually know about them. You never actually told us why glorification is worse than appreciation. All you said is that glorification means looking up to something and appreciation means to love it. We think that there is no actual mechanism or difference to this, because they are both the same. Oh my god. And now, so DPM talked about why, I'll take your people.
When glorification happens, people will be more likely to twist the truth in their favor to suit their ideals.
Okay, but even if people, let's say we agree, even if people twist it to their ideals, at least they see some sort of combination of their past inside them. And we think that that's extremely beneficial. Okay, DPM, why do we think that support is not equal to glorification? Why do we think people in status quo don't care about heritage enough, which is why we have to glorify it in the first place? We see currently in status quo, people are more affiliated with things like LGBTQ or things that aren't modernized right now. We think that they're pushing their heritage behind in the past. And we think that glorification is the only mechanism as to how we can actually bring about heritage and culture and bring it to the front. We think even if everything I said is wrong, and even if they choose the best out of the worst, why do you think this would incentivize people to learn more about this heritage anyway? We think that if people see only the good things anyway, they're still going to try and learn more about the heritage because they think the heritage is so good, and we think that it becomes really popular.
You're right, ma'am.
No. Okay, CG, we don't think that the progression idea about how people aren't going to progress. We think that it's okay if people think that the past is better. We think that some things people go in modern and they suck. We think that it's fine that if you think the past is better, because at least you've admitted to the fact that people turn to their culture for relief. We think that is the most important thing here. If you're idolizing your past, it means you know that you can find some culture, some relief in your heritage, proving our point as opposition. We think that secondly, on the thing for disrespect, we think attention seekers exist on both sides. Even if it's not glorified, we think that attention seekers will still find some way to nitpick the things they don't like about your country and bring them to the surface, and we think that isn't going to be helped on either side, so we think that's kind of a wash. CO talks about how culture is not heritage, and we think this is extremely irrelevant because culture is literally so deep-rooted in heritage. Things like artifacts and things like that are extremely important to heritage, and we think this is completely irrelevant. Okay, now it's the harms over benefits. We've learned in this debate that their benefits are that people are going to get extremely harmed by culture, whether this be to not positive change or this be to a negative case that they have provided this entire thing. We think that even if we take their benefits, that people who glorify are going to stick to conservative ideals and there will be positive change. Why are these benefits marginal then? We think that people who glorify these things will have their own morals and ideals, and this is not going to impact them. No, these people aren't going to impact them as heavily as you think they will. Secondly, we think that because conservative ideals are already so hated, we think that all of your things about positive change and things about how forgetting your past can lead to new things, we think that this isn't working because you're not going to be able to learn from something you don't know about, and we think that this isn't going to lead to positive change. So why do you think then that our impacts are a lot bigger? Firstly, we tell you about deep feelings of belonging in which people status quo are actually looking for. We think in the status quo, because of the difficulty in times, you're looking for a deep sense of belonging somewhere because you feel like everyone hates you and you don't know where to go. Secondly, we told you how we bring about change by telling you scale through numbers and how we tell you that we learn from our mistakes. Lastly, we told you how we reconcile from the past. Now, why do we think that we have a unique contribution and that's the most important? We think that firstly, we uplift the minority communities of a culture, something that none of the sides have done, and we think these are the most important vulnerable actors in this case, and we think the only way to help them is through our extension. We think it is very important to glorify and not just appreciate because it brings you a strong sense of feeling and belonging, and we think that we have told you how this celebration blends these people into society and makes them empowered. So proud to their close.
Thank you for all teams. Please cross-house shake hands and head back to the auditorium.
Thank you for the good debate again.